Hi, everyone, and welcome to Annual Campaign and Annual Fund Basics. My name is Susan Snozzy, and I am with Resource Development Operations and Collaborative Services, otherwise known as Club RD. The goal of our department is to help you succeed in your resource development efforts, and I hope that this webinar will be one way of helping you to do just that. There's a little joke that I read the other day, and I'm going to change it up a bit to be more applicable to BGC. So here it is. These two guys are stranded on a desert island, and one of them is freaking out. How are we going to get out of here? We're going to be stranded forever. Life is over. This is awful. And the other guy says, don't even worry about it. I gave to the Boys and Girls Club last year, and they always find me to ask again. Well, that's what I hope will happen with you and your annual campaign. Your donors will come to expect and ask from you. They'll even look forward to it. And if you can rescue them from a desert island, so much the better. So let's start with a definition. What is an annual campaign? An annual campaign is a board-driven effort to secure operating funds by obtaining unrestricted gifts from individuals during a defined period of time while demonstrating the impact of a club's mission. That's a really wordy definition, so let's break it down a little bit. First of all, the annual campaign is board-driven. Board members are partners in the annual campaign. They're instrumental in getting doors opened and securing gifts. You're trying to secure unrestricted funds for operating. So these are the dollars that you need to keep the lights on, to pay staff, whatever it is that comes up that keeps the club running. That's what annual campaigns are designed to do. They're designed to get gifts from individuals as opposed to corporations, foundations, or even special event gifts. An annual campaign occurs during a defined period of time, even if that defined period of time is the year 2015. That defined period of time might be December to February, just depends on how your club sets it up. And of course, you're trying to demonstrate the impact of your club's mission and work. Annual campaigns around BGC used to be known as It Just Takes One. And we know that lots of clubs used It Just Takes One, but lots of clubs found a different approach that worked for them. And that's just fine. So today we're going to learn what an annual campaign is, the benefits of conducting one. We'll learn to understand the role of staff and board members in the campaign. We'll make sure that you individually are able to plan and execute a campaign. And at the end, there will be some downloads for you that I hope will provide you with the needed resources to support your annual campaign. So if you've been doing annual campaigns for a while, I hope that this will be helpful in just brushing up your skills. If you're new to annual campaigns, I hope that this webinar will inspire you to have an annual campaign. It's really a great tool to help your club serve more kids more often. So we know what an annual campaign is. What's the annual fund? And these two things are often used interchangeably, but they're two different things. So the annual campaign includes gifts that are made in response to annual fund solicitations, whether those are face-to-face, written down, over the phone, doesn't matter. Annual fund gifts underwrite budgeted expenses, and they are repeatable or replaceable. So an annual fund consists of gifts that are given to your annual campaign. And that's really the only difference between the two. So an annual fund really represents those dollars that you're using to keep your club operating day to day. I think it's important to start this webinar by noting that when it comes to annual campaigns, one size does not fit all. In this webinar, I'm not going to tell you your annual campaign needs to last for 3 months or for 6 months or for 1 year, because for different clubs, different annual campaigns make sense. Before I worked for BGCA, I worked for a local Boys and Girls Club here in Omaha, Nebraska, where I'm speaking to you from. And our annual campaign really lasted all year. We were a fairly big organization with dedicated resource development professional staff. That made sense for us. But some of the clubs that I've worked with have one person, the CEO, who does everything. You're the accountant, you're the marketing manager, you're the resource development director, and that board has to be intimately involved in the annual campaign or it's never going to happen. For a club like that, it wouldn't make sense to have a year-round annual campaign because there's simply not the bandwidth. So find out what works for your club, and that's the schedule that you should use. The things that I'm going to tell you today are just tools, tips, tricks, and resources. Use the ones that work for you, And the ones that don't, you don't have to use. So we no longer are calling the annual campaign It Just Takes One, but we've been making an effort, as many of you may know, to rebrand the annual campaign as the Great Futures Annual Campaign. This is a super opportunity for you to rebrand your annual campaign. It Just Takes One has been around for 12 or 13 years, so it's probably about time for a little makeover. This will help you benefit locally from the national campaign. There's lots of attention, both in the media and in marketing, on the Great Futures campaign. This is a fantastic, massive national initiative that your club should be a part of. So when people see national advertising, they think, oh, my local club is part of that. And it's all consistent and equally branded across the movement. If you'd like to know a little bit more about the Great Futures campaign, visit greatfutures.org to learn about this national initiative, which is both a fundraising and a public awareness initiative to help mobilize our country to address the many, many issues that are facing kids today. We're redefining the opportunity equation for youth. School plus out of school equals great futures. And I would say for you, it's school plus your club equals great futures. And this is a great way to market your campaign. So those are just a few more of the benefits of having a Great Futures annual campaign. I hope that if right now you're starting up your very first annual campaign, it'll be a Great Futures annual campaign. And if you've had an annual campaign going for some time, you'll consider adopting this framework. So first, why should my club have an annual campaign? We're doing okay with special events. We've got some grants. Maybe you run a daycare or a bingo, or you have other sources of revenue. Those are all great. But Americans gave $358 billion to charities in 2014, according to the Giving Trends USA report. And of that money, 72% was given by individual donors, not by corporations, not by foundations, by individual donors. If you combine with that the 8% of that $358 billion that was bequests, and about half of those foundation gifts were family foundations, the dollars of which are controlled by individuals, then you realize that more than 80% of the money that was given to nonprofit organizations last year was given by individual donors. And the very idea of an annual campaign is to start reaching out to individual donors to ask them for gifts, letting you get a piece of that huge amount of money given by regular people to regular nonprofits. In case you're curious, this is a breakdown of where that money is going. And you'll see that human services, of which we are a part, ranks third only behind religious organizations and educational organizations as recipients of that charitable money. So there is a lot of money out there to be raised, and most of it comes from individuals. So it just makes sense that you would be getting that money that way as well. We have a question here from Angel who says, do you recommend that an organization run an annual campaign separate from a holiday and year-end campaign, or could they be one and the same? That's a great question. I would say they certainly could be one and the same. They certainly could be separate. So if you're a smaller club that's really only got a finite amount of time and focus, you might do your annual campaign all there at the end of the year. The concern could be could be a large percentage of your budget that would be unknown to you throughout the year. And if you need operating dollars going along and along, you might want it to be a little earlier in the year. But you can always do your annual campaign at one point in the year and then follow up with a year-end appeal. And I think Angel brings up a super question. No matter when your annual campaign is, a year-end appeal just makes sense. So great question, and thank you for asking it. So we now know that most of the money that organizations are raising comes from individuals. And I think this slide is really fascinating. So what this is doing is on your left, you'll see the Giving USA report put into this bar graph. So according to Giving USA, across all nonprofits last year, 72% of gifts came from individuals, 5% from corporations, 15% from foundations, and 8% from bequests. Special events didn't actually make the cut. But across all BGC organizations, across all of the Boys and Girls Clubs in the movement, we're only getting 25% of our revenue from individuals, 15% from corporations, 32% from foundations, 8% from bequests, and a whopping 23% comes from special events. Now, we'll have another webinar at a later point in the series that talks about how to maximize that special event and how to turn those special event donors into your regular donors. But for now, what I would say is, looking at these numbers, I'm sure you're thinking the same thing as I am. If 80% of the money out there is coming from individuals, that's where we should spend 80% of our time. And it looks like as a movement, we're not doing a great job of that just yet. We're pretty dependent on foundations and corporations, very dependent on special events. But the good news is that means we have lots of room to grow in individual giving, and the annual campaign will help you do just that, because this will help you to start preparing your donors for major gifts. So when we look at the way that our fundraising is structured, it really should look sort of like a pyramid, where you have the most gifts at the bottom of the pyramid and fewer gifts as you move up each level of the pyramid. But the thing is, if all you have are special event donors, grants, government dollars, bingo, raffles, what have you, you don't really have the opportunity to start building long-term relationship with donors to escalate their level of giving up the pyramid. All you really have are the two bottom levels of the pyramid. And that means you're going to have to keep regenerating more and more and more event attendees every year. You're going to have to keep always going out after those one-time kinds of gifts when you could, in fact, be getting significant gifts at those top levels of the pyramid. So the first level of the pyramid in a really nicely diversified resource development program would include event participants, one-time donors, people who send in memorial gifts, their camp sponsors, and things like that. You will probably have the most of these kinds of donors. Next would be your event sponsors, your consistent supporters, and those people who used to be called your It Just Takes One donors. So if you've been doing an annual campaign for a while, hopefully you've built out this level of the pyramid. If this is your first annual campaign, you'll start to build out this level of the pyramid and start to get some great prospects to bring up the pyramid in future years. Because the next level are your Jeremiah Milbank Society members. Those are those individuals who have made a $10,000 or larger unrestricted gift to your club during any calendar year. So each calendar year they can be eligible to be re-enrolled in JMS. These folks are really, really important to a club. And if you haven't gotten any JMS members yet, maybe that's a goal that you could have going forward, your first Jeremiah Milbank Society member. So if you've built up those JMS members and you're starting to move folks up the pyramid, when it comes time to do a capital campaign, you'll already have people in place. The next level are your Heritage Club members. Those are folks who have remembered you in their estate plans, and or your major gifts, people who are giving you truly significant transformational kinds of gifts. And at the very top is the ultimate gift, that once-in-a-lifetime gift that a donor gives that really becomes their legacy. But you see, you can't get up there to that once-in-a-lifetime amazing gift if you don't have those consistent annual campaign supporters. So it is really important to have a good annual campaign. So why do we have an annual campaign? First, it helps to bring increased awareness of your organization in the community. And along with all of the great publicity for the Great Futures campaign nationally, if you're running a Great Futures campaign locally, think about the way that you can start to cement yourself into the mind of the public as the #1 advocate for youth, as the #1 life changer for your community. It can help to build your organizational capacity. It will certainly help you raise more money, acquire new donors, renew donor support. Donor retention is at an absolute low for nonprofits. Last year, nonprofits basically lost as many donors as they gained. A net gain of almost 0. So if you're continually renewing your donor support, you're making sure that you don't lose those donors. As we just discussed, it can help you cultivate donors to a higher giving level. It can help to build their loyalty and develop constituencies for major capital and planned gifts. The annual campaign really is that foundation. So these are the fundraising principles upon which the annual campaign is based. First, a firm belief that personal, face-to-face solicitation is the most efficient and effective form of fundraising. There's a great author, Gerald Panis, who wrote, he's written a lot of really good books, but one of them is called Asking. And it's you can read it in an hour or less. It's a great guide for board members. And in asking, Jerry Panis says, you can't get money any way different than you would get milk from a cow. So you can't call a cow on the phone and ask it for milk. You can't write it a letter and ask it for milk. Can't send it an email or make a Facebook post. The only way to milk a cow is to sit with the cow and milk it, to spend time with it. And that's what we believe. Personal face-to-face solicitation is the way you're going to get it done. 100% board participation in the annual campaign is essential. 100% of your board should be taking part both as donors and as participants in the fundraising process. Each prospect should be asked to consider giving a specific considered amount. Rather than going into someone and saying, would you make a gift to our annual campaign? You or your board member or your CEO, apologize, my slide just went away, should instead be saying, would you be willing to make a gift of $1,000 or $5,000 or whatever the amount is based upon their capacity and their giving history? Because you probably know if you go before a prospect and say, we're here to ask if you would make an investment in the future by making a gift to our club's annual campaign, you're going to get a $100 check. But if you say, would you be willing to consider a gift of $10,000, maybe you'll get that $10,000 check. So a specific amount. We believe that volunteers are most effective if they're well trained, they're thanked, and they're supported. So this is your board members. We don't just send them out with the card and say, go raise some money, but they're well trained on what's happening at the club, principles of the club. They know the kids, they know the programs, they have the right materials to hand out. They need to be thanked repeatedly because what they're doing is absolutely amazing to support your club and supported with whatever resources they need. The challenge gift can be a great way to raise donor sites and empower volunteer solicitors. And a challenge gift is one in which a donor says, hey, for every dollar you raise up to X, let's say $50,000, I'll double it. I'll match every gift up to $50,000. These get people really excited. When you know that your gift is going to be doubled, you feel a little more encouraged to give a bigger gift because, hey, my $5 becomes $10, my $100 becomes $200. The case for support in which you articulate why your club is worthy of investment should be presented clearly and concisely. And we have an upcoming webinar about how to write your case for support, so I'd encourage you to tune in. Donor recognition and stewardship are vitally important parts of the fundraising process. You need to recognize your donors, thank your donors, and tell them how their money was spent. And lastly, as we've already discussed, individual donors are the greatest source of funds. So let's talk a little bit about how your campaign is structured. We're going to talk about each of these in turn. First, your campaign leadership is critical. Next, you want to establish a clear timeline. Third, you'll determine your goals. And fourth, tools, resources, and recognition. So in campaign planning, which is really the first part of your annual campaign, you'll determine the leadership of your campaign. This could be someone from your board. You could also have a chair who comes from outside of your board, and I've seen clubs do this really effectively as a way to get other people interested in being involved. Perhaps people who don't have time to be part of the board but still have a certain cachet in the community and lots of great connections. Your leadership could also come from your board, and you'll have a campaign committee. Sometimes people use their whole board as the campaign committee, and that's great. People with really huge boards will have a smaller campaign committee. And in the resources that I have for you to download after this webinar, there is our annual campaign toolkit, and it has information about structuring your campaign, sample job descriptions for your campaign committee members. So that'll be a great tool for you in terms of campaign planning. In campaign planning, you'll also determine your goals. I also have a document for you to download that is a goal setting guide. This would be great to sit down with your board and discuss the things that are on this goal setting guide. At a minimum, there are a few goals that you should have. The total dollar amount that you want to raise. Another goal should be 100% participation by your board and your staff as donors. A certain number of new donors you'd like to acquire during your campaign. A certain number of donors who will increase their gift over previous years. You may have a goal for new members of the Jeremiah Milbank Society. and a goal for a percentage increase in giving over last year. There may be other goals that are unique to your club that you'd also like to include. You can put them on that goal planning sheet, and your board will be really helpful in coming up with what goals are most appropriate for your club. And then you'll want to determine the timeline. Is this a 3-month campaign? Is this a year-long campaign? Is this a 6-month campaign? When does each phase start? When do we need to get things done? Your campaign leadership is absolutely vital. And if you have a great leader, your annual campaign is going to be successful. Some characteristics of a great campaign leader. First, it's someone who's willing to work hard. Second, it's someone who's passionate about the club. So much so that they'll go out and talk about the club to absolutely anybody because they know that what they're doing is seeking an investment and changing the future. Third, your campaign leadership, the committee, should be people who are accountable and who will hold one another accountable. When annual campaigns fail, it's usually not because they're not well structured or well timed. It's because folks didn't get out and do their asks. And so when clubs can keep themselves accountable, they're so much more likely to be successful. And whatever method your board or your campaign committee uses to keep each other accountable doesn't matter. It might be weekly phone calls. It might be regular meetings. They might do it via email, just as long as they're checking in and saying, yes, I went out, did everything I said that I would do. There was one club I worked with, and they did a 7 o'clock a.m. call every week. The rule was the call could only last for 10 minutes, and they kept to it. It was amazing. And each person would just go through and say, I said I was going to do this week. Here's what I got done. And that was where people would have to say, look, I said I was going to go do 3 asks this week and I didn't do it. I'll do it this week coming up. So they were keeping each other accountable. So determining your campaign goals is really important. You want to be sure that your goal is aspirational but attainable. So sometimes I'll talk to clubs who don't meet their annual campaign goals and they're having budget troubles because they said they were going to raise $500,000. They only raised $3,000. And I'll say, how'd you come up with that goal? And I'll say, well, that's how much money we needed. Well, how much money you need should certainly be part of determining your campaign goal. But if you don't have the prospects and the ability to raise that money, it's not a good goal. And you're going to be setting your club up for disappointment and crisis when that's the way that you decide to go. So it should be aspirational but attainable. It should be set in partnership with your board. You may start discussing how your annual campaign will work as a staff. But ultimately, the board needs to be bought in because they're the ones who are going to have to help you carry this out. You also have a lot of great, smart people on that board who might be able to catch you before you set an unattainable campaign goal. There's a fantastic tool to help you set your goals and to determine what gifts you need to make at each level. And every time I've shared this tool with the board, I've seen them all feel much more comfortable with conducting an annual campaign. Because when you come in and you say, we're going to raise $50,000. That number is really, really, really overwhelming. But when you see it structured out with how many gifts you need at each level, it's a lot more attainable and a lot less intimidating. So I'm going to show you a range of gifts table, the one that is available in the tools you'll download after this in the annual campaign toolkit. But I'll tell you also there's an automated range of gifts table under the tools tab on fundraisingbank.org. And so you can either do it manually or you can do it on Fundraising Bank. But either way, you should kind of know the science behind it. So here's the science, if you will. What this does is lets you know how many gifts you need to get at each level in your table in order to have a successful campaign. And so you can see that at each level, we need, so if this is for a $50,000 campaign, we need 2 $5,000 gifts for a cumulative gift total of $10,000 to make up our annual campaign successfully. We need 4 gifts at $2,500 to $5,000, total gift size of $10,000, making up 40%. Now we're up to 40% of our campaign, so 20% and then 20%. Next, we need 30% of our goal raised here, 10 gifts at $1,500 each. And then you can see the cumulative total keeps adding up. Another 20% of our gifts will be 10 gifts at $1,000 each. And then lots of gifts under $1,000 that we get through mass solicitations like mailings, phone calls, emails, and so forth. And what this does is lets you go from this huge unattainable number, so in this case $50,000, to, oh, we need to find 2 people to give $5,000. We need to find 10 people to give $1,500. We can do that. And what you can do is take your chart, export it into Excel, and start assigning prospective donors at each level. You need 3 to 5 prospects per gift. So if I'm trying to find 2 people to give 5,000 plus, I'm going to go back through my database, figure out who, based upon their past giving patterns, is going to be a good prospect at this level, and I'm going to plug their name right into my graph, right into my Excel spreadsheet. So I know I'm going to talk to Steve Smith, and I'm going to ask him for $5,000. I'm going to talk to Joe Smith, and I'm going to ask him for $5,000. And if those 2 don't work, I've got other prospects plugged in at this level. This is where you can keep your campaign from having that failure to meet its goals, because if you don't have enough prospects at a certain level, then you should change your range of gifts table. So if I don't have 2 prospects who can each give $5,000, then I'm going to need 8 prospects who can give $2,500. So the range of gifts table is a really helpful tool. And again, you can find the automated table at fundraisingbank.org. We say that resource development is a shared responsibility of the board and the staff. The board is powerless without strong staff support. So just as the staff need the board to go out there, do some of these asks, open some doors, build our profile in the community, the board really needs us as staff members to help them be successful by providing them the tools that they need. So the staff will be responsible for assembling a prospect list. And at a minimum, your prospect list should have biographical information, name, address, email, phone. That person's giving history. That way, when I go in to talk to Steve Smith, I can say, thank you so much for your gift last year. You know, with that $1,000, we were able to serve 500 hot meals to kids. And that's really helpful to go in and know that giving history. It also ensures that the gift is stewarded once again during the ask visit. Event attendance history is great too. Then you sort of know what they know. If they've come to your gala, then they've met your youth of the year, let's say. And those are things you can mention in that conversation. And then it might be that staff know information that could be important to consider, like this person is always out of town for the month of June, or this person has a kid that just graduated from college, or this person just started a new job. Those are things that could be helpful that if the staff knows, they could add to that prospect list. So sometimes it's hard to know what you should ask for. So I have here some classification guidelines that I hope will be good rules of thumb for you. So any donors who have given $500 or more in 1 year should be asked to increase their gift, because one of the things you're doing in your annual campaign is trying to help people ladder up, move up that pyramid, and give larger gifts each year. Donors who have given $2,000 or more are candidates for the Jeremiah Milbank Society. So here you're going to have a little bit longer cultivation period. You're going to really work to educate and steward that donor before making an ask. But it's entirely possible that these are folks who may be good candidates to make those more significant gifts. Start with your existing donors before going outside of your club circle. One of the things that board members in particular do quite a bit is sit down when planning an annual campaign and start saying, okay, who can we ask? And generating the names of new prospects. And that's great. But you have great prospects within your database already. So they say a bird in hand is worth 2 in the bush. You already have birds in hand. You have folks who know your mission, who know your work, because they've been coming to your special events, or they've given to you in the past, or they are club alumni. Those folks who are already given to you are the prospects that you want to start with. And then, of course, you want to build your circle. But especially in terms of these face-to-face asks at that very first level, you want to start in your circle. So there are 3 campaign phases. The first phase is where you're asking your board and your staff, your closest friends, to participate in the campaign. Next is where you're trying to get significant gifts from past supporters. And then the third phase is the public phase, where you're taking it to the streets. And you're asking people through mailings, through Facebook, through emails. You may even do a phone-a-thon to try to get the public behind you as well. And we'll talk about each phase in turn. So you'll notice that along all 3 of these phases, cultivation and stewardship is a part of it. And even if you're running a 3-month campaign, you should be doing cultivation and stewardship year-round, because you always want to be building a relationship with folks, building their connection to the club, and then thanking and recognizing the gifts that you've received. So the first phase is your board campaign and your staff campaign. Your board campaign is done face-to-face, and I really can't emphasize this enough. Lots of clubs will just hand out cards at a board meeting and say, hey, everybody needs to make a gift to our annual campaign. That's not a good way to go. It's efficient, but it's not effective, and there are a few reasons why. First, it sets a bad tone for your whole campaign. If you're going to be asking your board members to go out and do face-to-face asks, there should certainly be someone who takes the time to ask them face-to-face as well. Usually that will be members of your campaign committee or your campaign chair who will go face-to-face and ask your board members for a gift. This also respects your board members as donors. It doesn't just assume that their gift is a given, that their gift needs to be, you have to make a gift right now. It asks them for a considered amount, a think amount, and you'll be suggesting to them, your gift last year of $1,000 was so incredibly generous. This year we'd like to ask you to give $1,250. So they'll be getting asked for a specific amount. They'll be getting honored as an actual donor rather than a gift that's just assumed, and you'll set a good tone for the campaign. Now, your staff campaign, on the other hand, is really designed to create that buy-in across your whole organization. And when you have an organization where 100% of the board and 100% of the staff have made gifts at some level, imagine how much more persuasive it is when you go before a donor and say, our whole staff and our whole board have supported this effort, and I hope you'll join us. It's important when you're doing your staff campaign that staff are not asked by supervisors. They need not be asked individually. So it's a group solicitation. The best person to do this would be someone who's seen as a leader, but who is not high in rank. Your staff should never feel like they have to give a gift in order to keep their job or anything like this. I've seen clubs do this really successfully by offering payroll deduction and letting people take out, say, $1 per pay period. Another club did a contest between their program staff and their professional staff to see who could give more money to the campaign, and it was a change drive. So there are lots of different ways that you can do this. It isn't important that the gifts from the staff be huge and significant, because we know we aren't able to pay our staff as much as we'd love to. But it is important that they are participating in the campaign, and it's a great tone for the rest of the campaign. So your board campaign guidelines we've already talked about. It sets a tone for the rest of the campaign. We really want to have that 100% board giving, and we're going to ask face-to-face. Our staff campaign guidelines, one that I forgot to mention, gifts need to be kept confidential. It's important that staff not know how much other staff give, and no one should know their amounts except for the staff campaign chair. So you can have a staff member who sort of heads up the staff campaign in much the same way that you would do for a United Way campaign. And a job description is available in that manual that you can download after the webinar. So your next phase, phase 2, is where you are getting your top gifts through face-to-face solicitations. This is where you're talking to your past significant donors, your JMS members, etc. Here you want to be sure that you very clearly trained your volunteers, that they know what they're doing, that they feel comfortable going out and asking for a gift. In all of your meetings with your volunteers, you want to include the mission as you're talking to them. And when your volunteers are out talking to donors, they want to talk mission. They want to talk impact. Here you need to establish dollar goals and clear timelines. When are folks going to be out asking for these gifts? So in most annual campaigns, the board members will go out and do these asks. And if you have board members who are hesitant to do asks, you can certainly plug them into your campaign in other ways, or they can go out in pairs. So a hesitant board member with a seasoned board member. They need to have a timeline of when all the asks need to be completed. And as we said earlier, there need to be clear accountabilities, commitments in writing, clear campaign updates, and celebrate success along the way. So every message from the campaign shouldn't be do your ask, do your ask, do your ask, but you might also say, hey, Steve went out and got us $1,000 last week. Fantastic. Most campaigns fail due to a lack of askers, not of prospects. Your last campaign phase, this is where you're going to use targeted mail, phone-a-thon, social media, email to start trying to broaden your campaign and acquire new donors. Keep your messaging consistent across all media. So if you send out a mail piece, you can echo that mail piece on social media and on your website. If there was a specific message that you were using with donors when you were meeting with them face-to-face, use it in your targeted mail, phone-a-thon, and so forth. This is a good time to connect with your local media. Have them come into the club, have them take a tour, invite them to dinner, whatever you might do, so that you're getting some free media coverage. There are awesome free marketing materials from BGCA. They are available at marketing.bgca.org, and that's a fantastic place to get really high quality materials without a lot of outlay of money. Utilize the most personal method possible whenever you can. So this is a sample annual campaign sequence. I'm putting it up here so that you sort of know what it looks like. And when you're going through that annual campaign toolkit, you will see this. So we don't need to go through every single subpoint on these 3 pillars here, but kind of look at this because this will guide you through, okay, what do we need to do in phase 1? What do we need to do in phase 2? What do we need to do in phase 3? And then you can put that to a calendar as best fits what your club wants to do. In that manual, we do have some sample campaign sequences for 3- and 6-month campaigns, so you can use those to build out your calendar as well. I thought you might like to hear some ideas from other clubs. What are other clubs doing during their annual campaign? There's one club here in the Midwest that does a board member draft. It's like a fantasy football draft where there are 2 team captains and they draft board members onto their annual campaign team. Then they get points throughout the annual campaign for each phone call, face-to-face visit, for writing handwritten notes on the appeal letter, for each thing that they do that goes into making the annual campaign successful. So that club's trying to really make it a lot of fun and to encourage competition between the 2 teams as a mechanism for getting some action. One club, several clubs actually, use index cards. So, you know, we get used to sending out spreadsheets and Excel files, and, you know, sometimes those can be hard to read and a little inconvenient. So this club actually took a step back. And what this club, actually several clubs do, is just use index cards onto which they've put the donor's information, their giving history, any important biographical information, their phone number, and the ask amount. They hand those out to board members. Here's your 5 cards. We need you to ask 5 people. Here's your index cards. The board member can then take that card and it's tactile and tangible, right? And they can take out the card and make their 5 phone calls to try to get appointments. They can put notes on the back like Steve was out of town, or Steve would like to ask his colleagues to give, or whatever it is that they learn in the call, as well as pledge information, and hand it back to the club to be entered into the database. So those index cards, although they're really low tech, can be a really good way to get that campaign going. Clubs have lots of different mechanisms for accountability. So I told you about the club that does the 7 a.m. phone call. Some clubs do this via email, which is fine if people are checking and answering the email. But a lot of clubs struggle when email is the only accountability measure and nobody checks and answers to the emails. One club said, we want to make a big thermometer. We want to make a big thermometer and put it right up in the club that says how much money we've raised. That's a great way to keep people accountable. Are you contributing to that thermometer or not? Some clubs have campaign kickoffs where they might show some of our national PSAs and talk about the Great Futures campaign, have a little party, let people come and meet the kids. That could be a good place to invite the media. Some clubs involve the kids, for example, in creating thank you gifts to give to donors who have made a gift, things like that. Does anyone else have great ideas that you're using for your annual campaign? If so, type them into the chat box here so that the rest of the group can benefit from your expertise. I'll just keep going, but if anything gets typed in there, we'll be sure to review it for everybody. So once the campaign is over, the campaign isn't really over. What will happen sometimes with clubs is you have lots of momentum around the campaign. Campaign lasts for 3 months, and then the next big thing comes up. There's a leak in the roof, or you've got to start a new program, or school just started, who knows what. You have a staff turnover issue. Anything like that can take the focus away from the donors. And it's important that beyond the campaign, we're still stewarding our donors. It also is important that after the campaign, we analyze results. so you can know how effective your campaign was and so that you can make necessary adjustments in the following year. It's good to do this right after the campaign so that you can debrief your board. Lots of your board members are numbers people. That's how they got to be so successful. So let's give them some numbers. The first thing you want to do is review your goals. Which goals did you meet? Which goals did you fail to meet, and why? So did you have 100% board giving? Did you hit your dollar goal, etc.? Calculate return on investment. That is, how much did it cost you to have this campaign compared to how much money did you raise? So you can see how efficient you were. Were you spending tons of money on your mailing? Were you spending lots of money on handouts and tchotchkes? Or was it a pretty efficient way to raise money? You will probably find that it's a very efficient way to raise money, more so than a special event where there are lots of expenses that go into raising your dollars. Next, you can calculate your retention. And to do this, you first take the number of donors last year for your annual campaign, and then of those donors only, how many were repeat donors this year? So this, of course, won't work if you didn't have an annual campaign last year, but let's say that you did, and you had 1,000 annual campaign donors in year one. If 400 of those people returned in year two, you had a 40% retention rate. And that tells you that there's 600 people out there that you should keep on trying to get, maybe with some of those year-end mailings like Angel asked about at the beginning of the webinar. Ultimately, have you increased individual giving? And I hope that the answer to that question will be yes. Continue to steward and cultivate your donors. Show them that they're appreciated. Show them the impact of their gift. You never want your donor to say, the only time I hear from you guys is when you want money. And that's a big criticism of the annual campaign model, particularly those that are only lasting 3 or 6 months. You have this intense focus on fundraising for a short period of time, and then you sort of drop off the face of the earth. And that's not really what we're suggesting. So with an annual campaign, you have an intense period of fundraising, and the rest of that time, those are still your people. Those people who are giving at those higher levels especially need to be thanked and recognized. They need to know the impact of their gift, and you need to continue to try to build a relationship between them and the club. Otherwise, they're not going to come back next year. So that's really a broad overview of how to structure an annual campaign, the phases of an annual campaign, and some do's and don'ts for an annual campaign. In the handouts section over in your toolbar, you'll see an annual campaign goal setting sheet. You'll see the webinar slides that we just reviewed today, and you'll see the Great Futures Annual Campaign Toolkit, which is chock full of all kinds of different resources that I hope you will find helpful. Are there any questions at this point about annual campaigns and the things that we've talked about? Oh, never any questions. I know it's hard to talk on webinars. It always feels weird. That's okay. If you have any questions about annual campaigns, please feel free to reach out and contact me anytime. I check my email fanatically. So send me an email or just give me a call. I would be happy to talk annual campaigns with you. This is a fantastic tool to help you start really building up individual giving at your club. And individual giving is the way to build more great futures for kids and to start serving more members more often. So I hope that you will download these resources and take the things that you learned in today's webinar, bring them back to your board, apply them at the club level, and have some great success in annual campaigns. I see that we do have a question. So, oh, it's a great job. Thanks, Topher. I appreciate it. Again, if we have any questions, please do reach out and contact me. Thank you so much for attending today, and I wish you the very best of luck with your annual campaign.